and we're here to talk about love. We're talking about the lover, which is letter 6 in Tomberg's meditation of Tarot. And we're here to discuss the chapter. I found it very interesting. I like the reasons you told me before why you picked it. And I think it had a lot of different points, but the beginning point on love is something that stood out to me because it's a very interesting quality of love, and I'd like to explore it with you. So thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks, James. What struck you about what Tomberg says about love in this chapter? Where would you like to go with this?
Well, I got a little bit of notes I kind of made in the margins here. So the theme of the book is chastity, right? And this type of chaste love or chaste love. So a quote he says here. So at chastity, a word that came up to me, he doesn't use this, is anti-alienation, or the inverse of alienation, right? And I think it's so poignant in our time. The kind of the fundamental feature of subjectivity at our time is alienation from home, from family, from country, from kind of everything that we used to kind of feel a little bit of a semblance of home. But chastity, another kind of note I wrote down, reconciliation. It's this ontological love, this love of God, this unconditional love that it's fundamental, it's metaphysical, it's ontological. It has an effect, a substantial effect when it's shared, right? What are some other terms you can think of this love? Like, I want to kind of get at the root of what it means. It's like, it's God's love for us, essentially.
Well, it's a whole picture of love. Like, that's one of the things he spends quite a bit of time talking about, is that, like, where we get ourselves in trouble is when we cut it up into pieces, and then we over focus on an aspect of it. He uses the analogy of the kind of love he's talking about is the love that would be all of the possible colors of white light, as opposed to, say, if someone is just focused on eros, like Freud, who is the example he uses in this book. It's just like it's only the red, and you're taking that to be the whole.
I like that distinction that he kind of makes there. Here's a little quote that I think is wonderful to talk about this type of love. He says, now to feel something as real and the measure of its full reality is to love. It is love which awakens us to the reality of ourselves, to the reality of others, to the reality of the world, and to the reality of God. Insofar as we love ourselves, we feel real, and we do not love, or we do not love as much as ourselves, other beings who seem to be us less real. So he's talking about this and that note that I made here is love collapses the simulation into the real, right? Love is a reconciliatory function that is available for us, right? And he goes into the Hindu idea of, what the self is. The self is an illusion. So the idea is to merge into Maya, right? And through kind of indifference, said there is no self. It's to efface the self and become one with the Maya, with the illusion, juxtaposed to this Christian love, which is love of self, and love neighbor as self, right? And this love is actually ontological, and it's fecund. It creates, it builds, it unifies. He calls it a living unity. Sorry, go ahead.
No, he points out how Christianity goes beyond Vedanta, because yes, there is a higher self, but that alone is inadequate. Like, that you have to get to get to the place where the other becomes real to actually have true love, so that, like, to have the fullness that I really think that, like, idea of understanding the way he's talking about love, and ontological was the right word when you use that word, because he's talking about it's in the fullness. And that's what allows you to experience the fullness of being.
He says, another quote, he says, for love is not an abstract program, but rather it is substance and intensity. So it's the stuff the world's made out of, essentially. It's very interesting. And then where does this love come from? This deep love come from, and what happened? How come it's not readily accessible to us? Of course, he brings in the fall, right? And it's the love between Adam and Eve, which he relates to the love of self and neighbor. He says, who is this neighbor, right? And right after he
Right.
says that, he goes into the fall of Adam and Eve, and the oneness that was broken between Adam and Eve, right? Reconciliation there reunifies the whole reality in a sense. So the actual solution to the fundamental problem of alienation in our time is this love, and it's this restitution or reconciliation between self and neighbor, right?
The way he talks about the neighbor reminded me a bit of Ivan Illich, because he's for him it's like the neighbor is the one who becomes the true other for you,
Mm-hmm.
the one who you come to see as real as yourself, so that you are so where you're able to get out of that trap where you see yourself as more real than the other. For Tomberg, that's what he's suggesting. That's who the neighbor is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he says love is the reality of the other, right?
Right.
The other is a very popular phrase in the 20th century in the psychoanalytic psychological space, right?
Yes.
So and there's the problem within man is the problem between man and neighbor, right? I think they're fundamentally two sides of the same coin. The individual psyche is split, and then there's a split between the relationships between self and other, or self and neighbor, in a sense. So all schools, whether they're atheistic, psychoanalytic, conform to this problem that there is a split, there is a divide, there is a sin in the center of human consciousness, and it's also in the world. They're both there, right? So the thing is, what is it that can heal this rift, right? And it's this type of love which makes things real, makes people real. Like,
Right.
think of a spiritual father, a confessor, or a true confessor. That love, it expiates sin. That love of God through that person, right? So this is forgiveness. It's a type of love that it builds community.
Right.
Where do
That's
we?
the
Yeah.
that's agape in the way that John Vervaeke talks about it when he talks about agape as a person making a force. That's precisely what we're talking about, and it's a person making a force because it's what it does. It renders the other actually real
Mm-hmm. So what is
instead
the
of
other outside
illusory.
of this relationship of being actually real? Like, so what is it that most of our relationships are made out of?
Right.
I don't know. Like, that's what simulation is, a new word for a very old problem. A matrix, we live in the matrix, is a new nomenclature for a perennial problem of alienation, I think. Right?
Yes.
We use these terms, but they're not new notions. They're fundamental, and they're foundational. He also goes into this little paragraph here talking about this nature of love, this fractal nature of love that is between the love of the parents of a child, right? And
Right.
the love the parents have for that child is reflected into the child and that child's relationship with himself and his peers, right? And then himself, his peers, and his teachers and his priests, and it fractally patterns out. But it's this initial love that's how this love gets into us, through us, is through each other. So it's God's love flowing through us, right? So
Right.
that's, I think, when we see what marriage is thought of these days, and the divorce rate, not even
Well,
the
marriage
divorce
is an
rate. Yeah.
important word here because for Tomberg, what he says is that all of those loves fractally flow out of that kind of like whole Adam Eve love,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
which is that complete, all embracing love of the other. So that the boundary between the self and the other is essentially blurred.
How about let's play devil's advocate. So you